Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on our fantastic planet. And this is a live welcome here from Amsterdam. It's an absolute joy to be here today to host this very important live stream, an emergency live stream called The Voice of the Manager. And we're here ahead of a live event we have later on this afternoon here in Amsterdam. And we're going to be sharing our deepest thoughts, insights, research, data, and best practices. And delightfully, I've got the founding partner of the Global Growth Institute here live with me from the Netherlands, live from Amsterdam also. We're in separate offices, but we are in the same building. Erin Bouwen, how are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much, Wayne. Welkom op deze Nederlandse aflevering van de World Class Manager. Ik vind het echt geweldig dat we dit in het Nederlands kunnen doen. Wayne, I'm so happy that finally we can do it in the Netherlands and that we can do it in Dutch a little bit.
Yeah, finally. And actually, this I guess the crazy thing is that we've worked together for a long time. We actually founded the Global Growth Institute right here in Amsterdam. And it's wonderful that years later, we're here to launch our program, the World Class Manager program here, and it's fully now available in Dutch. So we're very much looking forward to sharing some of those insights with you. And just before we get into that super brief intro, if you've never met me or us as an organization before, my name's Wayne Clark from the Global Growth Institute. Erin and I have worked together for a number of years, and we've had the opportunity now with our team to work with thousands of different organizations around the world, and actually probably more than 100,000 managers who've been through our program. And as I said, we've now managed to translate the whole program into Dutch. So we're very excited to share some of the research and insights and to make it more relevant to the Dutch market also. And Erin?
Yeah, at the same time, I'm trying to teach Wayne some Dutch. Because when now it's translated in Dutch, you might as well learn the language. But I can tell you, as you know, from being in the Netherlands, that's crazy. But we'll keep it going.
It's not so easy. I find the sounds quite difficult to grasp, but I'll get there. I'm sure I'll get there. Sorry. No, I was going to say, in terms of, I guess it'd be good to get a super brief overview, Erin, in terms of your career and your journey and what you've done, because I guess you've worked with so many organizations, certainly in terms of helping them to build better structure, to focus on behavioral change, and importantly, looking at this important role of the manager and how it drives the performance of the organization. So just to give us a flavor of some of the great things you've done in your career.
Yeah, I worked together with you at JCI, an international organization aligned to the United Nations, but maybe we can get into that a little bit later. And then I started to do strategic execution work in the Netherlands in different countries. Basically, the sweet spot is always where does the structure need a change and the behavior need a change with that. I think that's the place where I'm the most happy. So it has to be a little bit difficult, Wayne. It shouldn't be too easy. If it's too easy, I'm not there. You have to drag me in. It's a little bit painful.
I love it. So if it gets super painful, this is when Erin comes in, right? This is when this is your sweet spot. The sweet spot is the pain spot.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Awesome. So we've got 5 big things we wanted to share with you as part of this session, this live stream today. It's actually the core content that makes up the live session we're going to have later on here in Amsterdam. And this is based on some deep evidence and learning that we've been doing over the number of years of looking at the role of the manager in the organization, and importantly, looking at the voice of the manager, which of course is the title of this session. And the big thing that we look at is that often organizations have a very strong view on what they think the manager should do. HR have a definite view on what the manager should do. The CEO has a definite view on what the managers need and what the managers should be doing, as does every other department in the organization. We've took a long, deep look actually at what managers actually need. And what we wanted to do is to share with you, I guess, how they feel about a number of key issues. These are key issues that we want the organization to help solve and improve. And it's quite interesting when we start to get an insight into what the managers actually feel about a number of these topics. So we're going to get into that as we go through. As I said, this is a pre-live event ahead of the session that we have later on here that we're going to be hosting in partnership with EMEA Recruitment. So we're delighted to be working with EMEA and look forward very much to the session later on here in Amsterdam. As I mentioned before in the short intro, we've worked now with more than 1,000 organizations around the world. Our research has made its way into a book form, but our focus has been on our platform. It's called worldclassmanager.com. As I also mentioned, we've now translated that into a full Dutch version, which we're also launching here for the first time in the Netherlands. And this is based on us working with thousands and thousands of managers now around the world. Again, very simple idea. What is it that's causing managers pain? What are these key pain points? And I guess as Erin alluded to, a lot of it is to do with the structure and the behavior and how the organization is organized. And this is something that we focus a lot of time and energy and attention on. So we'd love to share with you some of those insights as well.
And then practicing your Dutch, of course, along the way. Now,
Practicing
I'm
my
really
Dutch, which
thrilled
is
that
quite
finally
bad.
this is translated into Dutch, because although in the Netherlands our companies speak English a lot, we like our people to have a management development program in Dutch. It's easier to grasp. It's easier to really engage everybody. So although the English was good, I'm so proud that we did it.
Yeah, and we've got, it's like a lot of stuff in here, right? Which is like a very short way of saying a long story, but we've developed now 24 modules that are in the World Class Manager program. So we've got, you know, probably about 250 tools that are usable for managers, assessments, reflection questions, series of videos based on best practices. Some of you joining the live stream may have been through the program. It's a multi-platform stream. So whoever you've arrived at us, thank you very much. So you may have been through the program already, but this is like deep content, again, based on looking at what some of the best managers we've been able to interact with around the world do. And again, to have that available in sort of Dutch form is also awesome for us. So the program works around 3 core components, really, which is, and I won't try and say it in Dutch, but in English, this is, you know, what's the point, as we would say, you know, what can I do about it and what next? And this is the same structure that we keep all the way throughout the program. And then Erin, maybe you can say a word or two about the sort of, I guess, the breadth of content in here in terms of the 24 modules.
Yeah, the 24 module, we looked at what are the main issues that manager have to learn. And then you can see in Dutch, zorg ervoor dat je goede doelen kunt hebben. Zorg ervoor dat je je tijd optimaliseert. Hoe kun je je team optimaal engagen? En dat zijn echt onderwerpen die steeds terugkomen. That was real Dutch, wasn't it, Wayne?
That was real Dutch. And I love it. I love it. I don't get it, but I love it. Right. So the whole idea here is that we wanted to share with you, I guess, a few key stories, insights, and this is all based on data. So we're a very data-driven organization. We've had the opportunity now to work with, as I said, probably more than 100,000 managers have been through of some description our programs. And we've been collecting data on about 15,500 managers who've been through the program. So we'd love to bring to you 5 key arguments, 5 key things, 5 top tips. If you notice with like LinkedIn top tips, it's always like 3 or 5, right? Or 7. For some reason, we don't like even numbers of top tips. You never see the top 4 top tips, do you? Or the top 6. It's always the 3, 5, or 7. But we've got the top 5. So we're going to give you the top 5 top tips of the best things that we think make an impact. And this isn't because we just think they're nice and we enjoy them. This is more based on the evidence that we've now got from interviewing thousands of managers around the world. So with each one of these 5 points comes a data point, an argument, and some evidence that we've picked up from our research. And we'd love to bring this to life for you. The objective of this, of course, is to share with you as much as possible what the voice of the manager is saying. And again, if we are in a key leadership role, like if we're a HR director, a chief people officer, we're a head of learning and development, we're a manager in an organization, we're a board member, we're a CEO, you know, all of us have got a vested interest in helping our managers to be as high performing as possible. And here are 5 things that we found in our experience that can make a big impact with that. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about strategy and how to get that into the sort of hearts and minds of people. We'll look at communications and the role of good communications in the company. We'll look at what we call personal growth and growing and developing people. Number 4 is looking at how do we understand what the customer says. And this is an important area because often we spend a lot of time and money listening and learning from what customers do say, but how good are we at getting that through the organization? And then the final one is what we call around the sort of the vision. How do we excite people about what tomorrow looks like? And we've got to really situate this in, you know, wherever we are. And this is May 23rd, 2024, where people are facing, you know, some really difficult stuff in personal lives, even if you just looked at the cost of living crisis. For most people that we've worked with around the world, we're all experiencing the same challenges, the same issues. So people are under a lot of pressure. And how do we, in our workplaces, try and help people to feel energized and feel excited about a world which in so many cases is quite difficult to feel excited about, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And as I said, we'll intersperse this with some data and also some very personal insights from Erin and I as well. So the first thing we'll talk about is what we call the strategy. Now, when we talk about strategy, we're not talking here about how you design organizational strategy. You know how to do that. Your organizations know how to do that. Where our expertise comes in is working out how do we translate that through to something meaningful for people. You know, in most organizations, you find that the leadership team of the company are generally more excited about the strategy and the vision than anyone else we meet in the company. Why is that the case? Is that because they are smarter human beings? No, not that at all. It's often that the senior leadership of the organization get to spend more time discussing these important issues. And most people in most organizations, I would say most of the time, mostly don't understand what the strategy of the organization is. And again, this isn't because we just think that this is true and we came up with this fancy idea. We know it's true based on looking at the insights of people too. So we found out that only 46% of managers understand the finances of the company. So think about this for a moment. Even if you're not a particularly large organization, let's say you employ, I don't know, 200-300 people. Let's say that you've got 30 managers. Half of the management population, based on what we found, and this does seem to be true, whether it's small, medium, or large organizations, truly don't know what the finances of the company are. Now, ask the question, is this important? Actually, we should have shared the data here. I've got data from a LinkedIn poll we ran last week. And it's the first poll ever in the history of running polls on LinkedIn, as far as we're concerned, that we've managed to get 99% vote on a question. And the question was, should managers of the company understand the finances of the organization? 99% of people. It's so annoying that one person said no, but 99% of people said yes, they should understand the finances of the company. We all think this is important, but actually about only half the population of managers do understand the strategy.
That means it's easy to make your strategy and talk about it, but it's more important to change that, from my opinion, into an ambition with your people that is locked in behavior. So what do people do? What do you want your managers to do? And the only way to do that is to really make them understand and share that and make that ambition together. So create it together. That will mean that for them, it's much easier to grab it instead of just have the strategic paper. I see still too many companies sticking to the strategy and forget to make the translation to engage your own people.
Yeah, totally. There's such a good point. I mean, it's so seductive, isn't it? Often as a leadership team, is that you get into these really good conversations without sort of really thinking through on the customer end of this, the employee side of it. How does that feel? Does it resonate? Does it work? Does it excite people? And I guess a more fundamental point, do they even understand what this is all about? It's a nice set of words, but do people really understand it? Which I think is probably a very good link then to the second challenge we'll talk a bit about around communications.
Communication. I mean, there's so many ways to do your communication. And this is quite Dutch. I tested it with Wayne this afternoon and said, have you ever heard about campfire conversations? And he was like, what are you going to do? Are you going to light up this office? Which I'm not, but from my
the health and safety issue.
We have a safety issue, and you don't have to be Boy Scout here. It's this imaginary fire that you build. And campfire conversations is a method that comes from anthropology, from tribes. And we have quite some good Dutch researchers that did a lot of tribe research. Two famous ones that everybody in the course Dutch probably knows, Jitske Kramer, Danielle Brown. They made some great research about what can we learn from tribes, especially about communication and engagement. And one of the things they learned is the campfire conversations. And we can do that in an office, but not by building the fire, but by making a safe space where you sit together and look into the imaginary flames and ask the right questions. And then this is more creating safe space, and then ask about the thoughts that people have on the strategy, on the moves that you make, on the direction that the company is going, and frame it like that. And when you do that, that's a strong method of engaging people and hear their thoughts and their hearts. And what they say in tribes is when you get wise words that come in magical places. So make sure you create a magical place and your wise words come out. Then the only thing you have to do as leadership team is to listen to those words.
Wow, so, powerful.
Yeah, build the campfires, Wayne.
Not in the literal
not
office. You have to put a disclaimer for this, right?
Exactly. Do that. Too Dutch.
And in terms of the data here, Aaron, I guess this was interesting because we'd found out from our research that 61% of managers say that they understand the team's preferences, which I thought was quite fascinating, which of course means that about 4 out of 10 managers really don't.
Yeah.
And what does that...
Go ahead.
Yeah, what does that say to you? Because again, when you think of the, I guess using the campfire analogy of thinking about, what's the right mechanism to increase the opportunity that people are going to have this valuable dialogue between teams?
Yeah, I think the only way to have a valuable dialogue as a leader is to set aside your own ego, because the ego is always in the way from the good conversation. And 61%, if 61% of teams doesn't know the preferences, that's too high, isn't it? We want to get that down. And I'm sure that if you step down from your own ego and really start listening to what people have to say, that will absolutely increase the number.
Yeah, absolutely would. Again, this is a nice link to the third point, which is around how do we ensure that the conversations we have around our growth and development are really valuable. So if we talk about valuable dialogue, one of the areas where you'd probably say is really worth going after as an organization is looking at the quality of the conversation that managers and their teams have around personal growth and development. We found from our research that about 50% of managers would say that they leave the organization because they don't feel grown and developed. Yes, we believe it's true that that people leave managers, not the organization. I think that's broadly correct. But what we were more interested in that is, why might they leave managers? And is it because these managers are genuinely horrible people? And it's not often the case. It's the fact that the manager probably has not had very good conversations with them about growth, development, and things that make you feel genuinely more valuable should you leave this organization. So we worked with a large bank who have around 50,000 people. They were losing around 11,000 people each year, which is quite normal for them. And about 50%, it was about 5,500 people, cited career growth and development as the number one reason why they left the bank, which we thought was mind-blowing. And it's not because there are limited opportunities to learn and grow, or there is a limited budget for training and development. It's not that at all. It's more that the managers aren't having good regular conversations with people.
Yeah, and maybe that's also because we still think about assessment interviews when we have conversations about growth and development, about personal growth. And what I saw in a lot of companies is the minute you add some co-creation conversations in there, something changes. Because when it comes to growth and development, you as a manager and your team, you want to talk about the development of both of you. Yeah. So for me as a manager, it's really important to talk about someone's growth and then ask the question, so what do I have to develop as your manager to make you grow, instead of make it as in an assessment way. Actually, in the Netherlands, we have a word for that. It's called het goede gesprek, which that's a nice word for you to learn it. But it's goede gesprek. It says, make sure it's a good conversation, not just an assessment. And when are you going to grow? And when are you going to start doing that? It's not enough. It starts when you really try and have that co-creation feeling on it.
And I think this is an important word, the co-creation. So, I mean, we talk a good game. I'll talk about the UK because it's where I spend most of my time. But in the UK, we talk a great game about collaboration is really important. Most organizations will say they want a collaborative culture. They want teams to innovate, to co-create. But it's more like a sort of a desire or a dream. If you look at are there any concrete plans in place to facilitate these campfire type conversations? In most organizations, probably not. It's not because they've got bad intent. It's just because life happens. But you mentioned earlier, when we were talking before the session, about this idea of co-creation, and I think it's the way you probably describe it is definitely different from a Dutch point of view than I think the way that we would think about it. And I think it's quite powerful.
Yeah, great. And it has everything to do with proactiveness, I think.
Yeah. Which is and I do wonder, because it was a shared friend of ours a number of years ago and was talking to me about how in Dutch culture you had to work much more collaboratively and co-create to keep the country out from being flooded.
Yeah, that's probably right. Otherwise, the water is winning.
Well, it's something interesting, isn't it? There is a we talk often about the burning platform and the reasons for doing things. I think it's quite a solid reason here, being under seawater level, that makes people really think about co-creation.
Yeah, it's powerful in the Netherlands, and it's getting more and more important as well. You see that our office buildings as well. We share offices together to co-create, instead of saying, "Oh, this is my office, this is your office." So it's fluid.
Yeah, I think there's a definitely different cultural nuance in that one. And then we also found out with this one, Erin, around the number was quite mind-blowing for us, because we found out that about 81% of managers believe that the products or services of the organization could be better. I thought that was fascinating, because this is managers telling us loud and clear that the organization is not listening to them, which I thought was quite interesting. I just wondered your take on that.
Yeah. And I think that is the internal client and the external client, because when managers say this is our internal clients, as a leadership team, this should be our internal client. And if they say you don't listen to us, we don't know, you don't know enough what makes us tick. I think you have to step in. You have to be proactive and go and get your information instead of waiting. Also, what I see is a lot of managers are too far away from the primary process. So the really what makes the company tick, what they sell, is for managers sometimes very hard to hear. It's very difficult to listen to. It's far away. And the client will not come to you, and it's easy to say, oh, we just do a survey and then I look at the results. That's not what we mean. You really have to go and step in there as well into your internal client as your external client. But that takes a lot of guts, and it takes a different way of working. You have to facilitate the growth.
And can I ask you, because you mentioned 2 words there, which I sort of gripped onto, and it's a terminology that we probably wouldn't use so much in the UK. What do you mean by primary purpose?
The primary process of the company.
Primary process, yeah.
Yeah, the process that really brings in the money for the company. So what is it that the company sells and makes money? That's your primary process. And in between your primary process and you as a manager, there's your management. That's the facilitation that you have to step into.
Yeah, and I think this prompts some fascinating questions for, if you were to pick, so as a sort of test, if you picked out at random 10 or 15 managers from your organization and asked them the question to describe to you, what the primary process is, how do we actually make money, how do we create value, I think a lot of people would struggle. And the further you get away from the front end of the organization where they have a real interaction with the client or the customer, I think the more weird that story would become, because in most cases the organization, i.e. the senior management population or the leadership team, are not, to use your word, are not making proactive plays to the managers to help them understand what the primary process is. We believe there's a primary process fairy, and she comes along and she sprinkles the magic dust, and then we just, like Neo in the Matrix, I know Kung Fu. I know the primary process now, and it doesn't work like that, does it? It takes hard work to help people to understand that detail.
That's the voice of the manager.
Yeah, the fairy manager we should have.
Fairy manager.
And then for the 5th point around what we would call leadership. Now, when we talk about leadership, we're not talking about, because it's such a broad church of content around leadership, right? We're not trying to cover the whole thing here. What we're looking at is an aspect of what we would call exceptional or world-class leadership, which is the ability to genuinely inspire and energize and fire up the people in the team. The challenge is, and as I'd mentioned at the beginning, one of the challenges is, well, many challenges, but one of the many challenges for the modern person in May 2024, let's look at cost of living crisis. Now, this is a significant issue which is facing everyone pretty much across the board. And one of the issues is how do we remain, or how do we get our people to feel and be excited about the future of the organization when we've got so much stuff to deal with in our personal lives? We know from looking at things like, we work very closely with a charity who helps people with anxiety. We know, and depression. We know that the numbers of people calling this charity is exponential. It's getting more severe. All of these challenges. So we can't set that aside because that's real human life. But inside the organization, how do we, as a manager, how do we excite people about what the future looks like? And this is an interesting challenge for us, because we often find that the CEO and the leadership team of the organization are usually more excited about the organization's future more than anyone else we meet in the company. And is that because they're like strange human beings and just feel excited about the company vision? No, the reason why they're more excited than anyone else is because they made that thing up. Things that you make up generally you think are pretty good, right? And often, as we say, as human beings, we're quite narcissistic. If you meet someone like you think they're a good person, right? This is usually the way. You meet someone, you think, I really like that person. Yeah, they're just like me. Fantastic. They're excellent. So we know that this is like an inherent bias. Things that you create, you generally think are pretty good, which is why most leadership teams, because they understand the context, they understand the content, they really get it. They've sat with a number of other senior people in the organization. Forget senior people. They've sat with a number of other human beings and actually talked this thing through. They've co-created it using Erin's words. They've had these really valuable conversations. They may have even built a campfire and thought about it. This is something that we know that they do. Your average manager in the organization does not do that. It's not like I would walk out of here and there's some people sitting over here and say, hi, John, do you fancy talking about the strategy of the organization, what it means to our team? John's going to look at me like I'm weird, like he needs an injunction on me. Then keep me away. This is an important conversation, but it's a conversation we often don't have. And the challenge is then, if we don't even have that basic level of conversation with the team about the vision, how can we possibly start to make it relevant to the team? And this is something mind-blowing for us. So 42% of managers do not know what the goal of the organization is. So if you think back to, again, our last session, point number 4 here that Erin raised around this primary process, I mean, this is fascinating. So I would argue, based on the data we found, that at least 42% of the managers would not know what the primary process is. And remember, this is a self-reporting number, which assumes that 58% are telling the truth. I'm not saying that they're not, but this is self-rated, so you know where I'm going with that. So when we think about this number, it tells us quite clearly about half the population truly don't know. And then, so that's base level. What we need to do is at least get them to know. If we can get them to understand it, then we're facing another challenge, which is, how do I make this relevant and exciting for someone? And the key is, and I guess going back all the way to Erin's point in point 2, and around the fireside or the campfire conversation, is we've got to make this feel valuable and relevant for the individual. If this feels like there's something in it for them, then of course there is a natural inherent selfish intent and something that I'm going to get out from this. So it tends to be that people would be more excited about it. But in order to get to that point of conversation, you probably need at least, I'll put some time on it, you probably need at least half an hour to an hour, I would argue, for most human beings to sit there and talk this thing through and make it make sense. These things don't, yeah.
And get your own words. Make sure that managers use their own words and not your words. It has to become theirs. It's the only way that they can make it them. Otherwise, it's just the words of the leadership team, and that will not do the job.
Yeah, totally is, because you can't translate that stuff in a way that works for the team, can you? Because it's often corporate speak. It's lots of big words. There's some sort of like overarching vanilla looking message, like we want to be the best in our industry, or we want to be the number one chosen company in the automotive sector or the financial services sector. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't often have something that grips people to it emotionally. The challenge is that was the set of words that the executive team arrived on about what they would communicate. The understanding and the intention and the context was much richer than that, but we never get an opportunity often as the most junior sort of managers in the company to get that sort of insight. So we thought we'd sort of finish by talking about a couple of challenges for a second. Now, this is regardless of kind of wherever we've been. I'll get rid of these slides here. Actually, no, we won't. We'll keep the slides. Wherever we've been around the world, there seems to be a consistent challenge. Yeah, and an issue everywhere, right? Because one big thing is the attention span problem. So we often talk a lot about it. We were looking at how much people spend in terms of their day on social media. And there's some fascinating studies. I'm not going to bore you with some of the data on this. And also in my own household, I have my very own 16-year-old in my house. So I get to learn a lot from looking at the interactions on social media. However, what we found is certainly that it's not necessarily the attention span is decreasing, because if you look at the span of human existence, to believe that something has happened to our attention spans in the last few years because of social media and it's changed us chemically, physiologically, if you look at it that way, it's probably untrue. What we found out is it seems to be that the competing factions for our attention has just become much more fierce. So there are lots of really well-funded organizations out there, from like all the social media channels, like the very one you're probably on right now, which is designed to try and grip your attention for as much as possible. And of course, our message internally is fighting with these really well-funded organizations that are also trying to get the attention of our people. So if you think about this, which is, I guess, a kind of irony that we're on this call talking about this issue, in the middle of a working day where you would maybe hope that the employees in your organization would not be watching the Wayne and Erin live stream, although of course we're happy that they're here, but it's more about the fact that they would be concentrated on what might be the strategy of the organization, what might be the primary process. So again, in a modern world in 2024 where we are, does this call us to question the way that we engage and communicate with our teams across the organization? And I think the answer should be a resounding yes. And the reason why we say this is because we were with a company last week, actually, that were talking about putting out lots of video to their staff. And a typical organizational video is quite long. No one's got the attention span to watch it. If you go on YouTube and you see a video that's more than 2 or 3 minutes long, I would suggest you probably think, forget it, unless it's something that you really, really want to learn and watch. So I think the attention span problem is a huge issue. And this goes hand in hand with the second challenge that we see everywhere, which is, and I'd love to get some of your thoughts on this one, Erin, as well, is the second challenge is around the lack of time problem. No one has time anymore. Interestingly, it seemed to be that we've never had time. So this article was written by Harvard Business Review, and it was written in 1974. It's the second most downloaded article in Harvard Business Review history. And in the article, they talk about the things in the organization that steal your time. So just to touch on a couple of these, because I think they're quite important. One of them is what it calls boss imposed time. And I've seen this many, many times, I'm sure you have, where a CEO, for example, would say, over the weekend, my daughter was in Starbucks with her friend and they saw this like brand of water and they were discussing something and they had this great idea, right? So what we're going to do as a company is and you're thinking, hold on. Before you say anything else, what are you going to do? This is based on no evidence, no data, pure gut feel. I'm not saying your daughter's not smart. She probably is. But the idea that you're going to take something as a small evidence piece and then impact the entire organization. The challenge is, depending on your culture, often most other leadership team members sit around and say, yeah, let's do it. And then what often happens, this is like a overgeneralized example, it becomes a cascade of activity and effort. I'm not saying it's about the water, but you know what I mean. It might be that we have an idea, it's unchecked, people just run with it, and it becomes a total waste of organizational time. And we've seen this so many times. We've got another thing that we call system imposed time. So this is where we're doing things in a way that aren't re-looked at anymore. Again, taking the idea of looking at this primary process, I would imagine, Erin, thinking about this a bit further, that there's going to be a whole other series of things that you would need to do based on your experience and things I've heard you talk about before, that you need to then implement, to put in place to make that whole thing work. And you think, how much time and effort is spent on that? Often what happens is we're acting out of a way of doing things, a process, which is really ineffective, inefficient, and it's costing us time and money, and we don't really look at it. So often the system itself steals the organization's time because it's doing ineffective or focusing on ineffective processes. Again, I'd love your thoughts on this one, because I know it's an area that you spent quite a lot of time looking at.
Allow yourself and your team to have spare time, to have free time of doing nothing, because it looks like you're doing nothing, but you do a lot. And I know that a lot of leaders have the same problem that I have. You think, I should be busy all the time. I should move. And before I know it, especially exactly the example that you just gave, with me moving as a leader, everybody has to move. So I push people into a movement that just consumes time and doesn't do the right thing. So I know it's very, very important to make free time in your diaries, just do nothing time. But actually you don't do nothing, you do a lot, but you don't push it over the edge.
And it seems to be quite a consistent theme, actually, of many of the CEOs we've come across. I'm sure your experience is the same, Erin, that you find that the more successful the individual, oddly, the more time they seem to have. And it's like, I watched this really good interview with Joe Rogan and the Elon Musk interview. It's quite long. It's like a 2-hour interview, and I think it was probably done a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Elon, It had the time to do that interview for 2 hours.
Well, that's the thing. He had the time to do the interview for 2 hours, which is interesting. And then also, he was talking to him about how is it you do this? How do you run X? How do you run SpaceX? How do you run Tesla? How do you run, the Boring Company, Neuralink, which he's working on? I think he has, a huge family, like I think 8 children or maybe even more. He's got a lot of things to do, but the same 24 hours as every other human being. So how is it that he's able to do these things? And what sort of Elon Musk is describing is, I guess it's the power of delegation and how he's sort of building the competence and empowering the teams around him and hiring excellent people who can do that. But often we find that great CEOs we come across, really successful people, tend to have more free time than the average, which is in a way like an irony, right? Because it should be that they're more busy than everyone else, but it's not the case.
Yeah, and with them, they're managers as well. So maybe it's time to sometimes talk to your managers and say, can you do nothing for half a day? Because that benefits the company.
Well, this would be our goal, right? So we would argue that you should be having between 10 to 20% of the working week, where you've got absolute clear space. How you redeploy the time, again, I think like you mentioned, is it might be that you want to reuse that time to go to the gym, or you might want to do some yoga or whatever it might be. But of course, we want that time to be value adding, probably for your career and hopefully for whoever you work with or for the organization or for the clients of the organization, is that we can use it in some value adding way. But often we don't get the time to spend that free time because it's never possible. And one quick tip on this, we met with a guy a number of years ago who was sharing with us some examples of this, and I think this is a great example. One of the things he said, and if you apply it to your life, is could you go, ask you the question, could you go on holiday in the next couple of weeks? Unless you have a holiday booked, I'm sure your answer is going to be no. And then if I ask the reason why can't you go on holiday in the next couple of weeks, you'll probably say because your diary looks really busy. It's okay, but could you go on holiday in September or October? And you'll probably say, probably I could do. Why is that the case? Well, because your diary probably looks a little less busy in September or October. So the idea is, why don't you take 10% of your week from October the 1st and you keep that time in your diary absolute sacred, that you will do nothing with that time other than keep it free. And life will magically work its way around it. And of course, as you get closer and closer to that time each week, you can redeploy that time at will. I mean, this is something that I picked up and that I've applied to myself. So I try and have, most weeks I'll have what I call a catch-up day. So it's a totally free day of meetings. As I get closer to that day, of course, I can redeploy that time, but I'm quite regimented about making sure that that time is there. And then I can do value adding things that further what we're doing, our work and research in the company as well. But I think that's a very simple tip to be able to do it, because the challenge is, as a very busy modern manager, what we try and do in the present is solve the lack of time problem. And you look at your diary over the next few weeks and you think, it's impossible to solve. I can't solve this problem. We can never solve the problem in the short term. It has to be maybe medium to long term, but it definitely can be solved. So yeah, so I'm gonna refer back to Erin here for maybe a final word. But I just think, on this topic of the voice of the manager, I think, we looked at these key areas of looking at how do we help them to understand the strategy? How do we help to improve communication? How do we help to improve the quality of the conversation in personal growth? How do we make sure that the organization really understands the voice of the customer? I know this is voice of the manager, but the voice of the customer. And then the final point is that, the age-old challenge. How do you get people fired up and energized about a vision? And ultimately, the answer is we've got to make it meaningful for them and have it feel like there's genuinely something of value in this for them as well. So, Erin, what do you think? Final tip, final point. What do you think?
Final tip. Well, final recommendation is to really have a closer look at the data that we collected, because what I find so striking is that it doesn't matter where that manager lives. If he's in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Norway, in South Africa, the voice is the same, the structure is the same. So all the data that we got is from companies around the globe. And I find that so interesting, that despite cultural differences and despite some differences, like we build campfires in buildings and you don't yet, the basics are the same. We all want to do what's best for our clients, and we all want to do what's best for our teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a huge thank you to Erin for being here with us and sharing these insights and best practices.
Thank you.
I know it's a joy. Usually I'm on my own doing these things, right? So it's nice to have some company. It's a lonely world, and I'm an only child. Maybe I've got some issues here.
Oh, I adopt you.
Let's do some therapy. But yeah, this is it's great to be here with you, sharing these insights. And of course, in about 2 hours' time, we have a live face-to-face session with, I think, around 45 or 50 HR directors mainly from Dutch companies who are going to be with us here live in Amsterdam. So we're very much looking forward to that. And of course, for all of you dialing in and connecting with us as part of this process to do these live streams, we really appreciate your engagement, because you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. So we really do appreciate your time. Yeah, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you on future sessions. Goodbye from me.
Bye-bye, and thanks again.
See you guys.